This is Dr. Watson and the Dead Letter Exchange, written by Barrel Coops.
Rain-slick streets, ghost tunnels, and a city's secret alphabet collide in a thriller about roots and responsibilities, who gets delivered, who gets returned to sender, and what it costs to keep a ledger honest.
Dr. Watson and the Dead Letter Exchange.
Chapter 1. Postman's Park. Rain ticked the iron railings like a clock that had learned impatience. Postman's Park lay in its usual pocket of hush, plane trees dripping, office workers editing their lunches under the glass shelter, and along the wall the memorial tiles. Neat, sorrowing rectangles that told blunt stories about ordinary people who'd drowned or burned for strangers. The body had chosen the wrong bench to die on, or been placed there by someone who preferred tidy exits. Male, mid-40s, suit that didn't brag, one shoe darker from the puddle it had found. He had the pallor of a man whose heart had surrendered quickly, but when I touched the jaw, the hinge resisted in a way that suggested timing rather than struggle. "Name?" I asked without looking up. Lestrade's notebook made its familiar papery sigh. "Edmund Keane. Accountant at Fairbridge and Low, found 10 minutes ago by a jogger who brags for a living." "Wallet?" "In the inside pocket," Lestrade said. "Cards, staff pass, a receipt for a sandwich with the sort of mustard people write columns about." I lifted Keane's wrist. The watch had stopped and then remembered itself, hands that had jumped and lost a beat. Under the cuff, 2 narrow bands of bruising encircled the forearm. Not rope, rollers. The skin over the knuckles was rasp-burned, as if fed to impatient rubber and pulled back fast. "Sorting machine kiss," I said. "In a park?" Lestrade's tone wanted this to be a heart attack and a hot lunch. "Staged," I said. "These injuries were made somewhere industrial and brought here while the muscles were still warm." He didn't run. He was carried or coached. I opened the jacket. Tucked against the lining was a narrow, tired envelope stamped undeliverable in a font the post office had forgotten how to use. The window showed no address, only the pale ribs of folded A4. The flap was sealed with one cheap adhesive stamp, second class, Smiling King, and a small smudge where a thumb had pressed it down too carefully. I slid a gloved nail under the gum and lifted. The stamp came free with a sigh, leaving a perfect rectangle of clean paper. "Don't lick it," said a voice behind Lestrade. "It may be the only royal left that does anything useful." Archibald Locke stepped under the shelter as if he'd been invited by the rain. Collar up, shoulder thin, hair that had lost a quarrel with a hand dryer. He smelled faintly of dust and ozone, the perfume of rooms that keep secrets warm. "Mr. Locke," Lestrade said without turning. "Lovely. I was just thinking the morning lacked drama." "Then I'll whisper." Locke stood beside me, not touching, his attention already nested on the stamp in my palm. "Do you hear the paper singing, Dr. Watson?" "Paper doesn't sing," I said, and angled the stamp toward the meagre light. "Everything sings," he said. "You have to decide what song you're pretending not to hear." Second-class stamp. Innocent face. Along the white margin a tremor of black freckles, ink that had no business being there. I took out my penlight and skimmed the surface. The specks resolved into order no eye should casually find, a neat run of twin dots and thread-thin bars, each too fine for the naked eye to love. Not random. A fence painted onto the border where collectors never look. "One-time pad," I murmured. "Or a barcode laughing at its own reflection," Locke said. He lifted Keane's staff pass from Lestrade's hand like a man borrowing salt. "Mount Pleasant," he read from the logo. "Mail Centre, of course." The inside of the envelope held 3 things. A single sheet of paper, blank to any honest inspection, a postcard of St. Paul's with the dome cropped meanly, and an older stamp, pre-decimal, showing a runner with his bag at full tilt. Beneath it, a row of rectangles had been dotted with a biro, tiny, careful marks riding the perforations like notes on a stave. "Optical readers," I said, looking from the bruises to the envelope. "He's telling us where he was and how he died." Locke rocked on his heels, pleased. "He's telling the post office," he said. "We're eavesdropping." I turned Keane's hand gently. Under the thumbnail, a crescent of black no bigger than a comma, the ink caught where a sharp corner had slipped. The sort of nick you earn sliding envelopes through a feeder, again and again and again. "He let the machine take his prints," I said. "It took more." Lestrade closed his notebook. "Say it plainly. What did he poke that poked back? Locke pointed with the staff pass at the memorial wall at a tile that commemorated a man who'd saved 2 boys from a canal and not himself. Those tiles are messages to the living, he said softly. The dead only speak if you know their language. Keane posted something he shouldn't have. Someone returned him to sender. Lestrade sighed the way men do when authority expects the wrong sort of miracle. Before lunch, he said, I would like 3 things. 1, a cause of death that won't make a coroner throw Latin at me. 2, a reason for Mr. Keane to visit his own mail centre on a Saturday. 3, reassurance that this isn't going to become another of your scavenger hunts through rooms with unreliable electricity. Cause, I said. Likely arrhythmia induced externally. No classic skin burns. Look here. I parted the hair at the base of Keane's skull to a faint welt shaped like a lazy comma. Short pulse, enough to confuse conduction. Delivery device close, too clean for chance. Reason, Locke said, flipping the staff pass. Keane's clearance still active. His department, routes and reconciliation. He tapped the card. He balanced where letters went with where money pretended to. If someone built a little river under the main, he'd hear the splash. And reassurance? Lestrade asked. Locke smiled without teeth. Absolutely not. I turned the postcard over. Nothing written. Along the edge, a narrow ladder of squares had been penciled on the glossy back, then erased and redrawn, as if someone's hand had learned the route by failing. I am for SCC, Locke said, seeing my look. Royal Mail's 4-state code. It doesn't just label an address. It tells machines which way to open and where to spit. Beautiful when you think about it. Like teaching a city to read. Someone, I said, is writing to the machines. And the machines are writing each other back, he said. He placed the modern stamp beside the old runner, nose to nose across time, then aligned them so their margins became a single gutter of ink. The fence of dots joined into something like sense. He took a photo, filtered it, and handed me the screen. The fence had become letters. Not many. Enough. B2, midnight, sought for none. Postmaster watches, Lestrade leaned in. English, please. Mount Pleasant, Locke translated. Basement Bay 2. Optical line reader humming. Midnight sought for none means the line runs after hours with no official route. And the signature? The polite psychopath who enjoys hats. He looked at Postmaster. Keane tried to send us a map, I said. Didn't finish the message. He didn't need to. Locke stepped back from the bench, his eyes taking the park apart. Tiles, shelter, camera angles, sightlines. He needed us to listen to the letter he'd already posted. Lestrade glanced at the jogger, the shelter, the tiles. Rain had turned the memorial wall into a catalogue of glistening regrets. You're going to tell me, he said, that Royal Mail is a computer with doors. It's worse, Locke said cheerfully. It's an air-gapped network with Christmas stamps. A gust shivered through the trees and flipped the corner of Keane's shirt. I tucked it gently back. He had a small mole on the left ribs, the kind that doctors catalogue and friends never notice. Ordinary, devastatingly ordinary. Lestrade, I said, will need access to Mount Pleasant after hours. Which I absolutely cannot authorize, he said, already reaching for his phone. The chief superintendent has a thing about heritage buildings and scandals. I'll secure you a tour that doesn't mention the time. Be there before midnight. Don't move the body until my pathologist arrives. Locke? Yes, Inspector? If you bring me a ghost, Lestrade said, make sure it pays postage. Locke looked at the stamp again, the tiny fence that had become a voice. He already did, he said softly. We bagged the envelope, the stamps, the postcard. I marked the welt at the skull, the roller bruises, the clean fingernails of an accountant who had learned a dirty job quickly. The park accepted the removal with its usual embarrassed grace. Rain resumed its arithmetic. At the gate I paused under the plaque that tells you why the place exists, to remember civilian heroism the city would otherwise forget. Locke stood beside me, hands in pockets, watching the wall as if it might blink. You think they chose this place for poetry, I said. I think they chose it for accuracy, he answered. Dead letters, dead heroes, dead accountant. The postmaster likes jokes. He'll like one less, I said, when we write back. Locke's mouth did the quick, thin thing I had learned meant yes. Then we'd better find the pen, he said. Mount Pleasant keeps them in red. Chapter 2. Mount Pleasant. Mount Pleasant always felt like a cathedral that had rented itself out. High brick, long naves of conveyor, stained glass replaced by hazard signs. Even after hours, the place breathed. The smell of damp cardboard and ink, the metallic aftertaste of oil, the quiet clink of metal trolleys settling. Lestrade met us at a side gate in a high-vis that made him look allergic to citrus. "You have 40 minutes of legitimate curiosity," he said. "After that, the union will want answers I don't have." A facilities manager with a keycard smile gave us the safety talk. Pinch points, emergency stops, how not to die under 15 tons of parcels that had all paid for next day. "Basements decommissioned," she said, swiping us past a sign that politely lied. "Old optical readers pre-upgrade. We keep the power isolated. Except when it isn't," Locke murmured. She pretended not to hear, and left us at a steel door with a sticker that read, "OLR, authorise before entry." Lestrade produced a fob he definitely shouldn't have, and the lock made its church mouse click. Basement B2 was colder. A single aisle of sodium light ran between sleeping hulks. The optical line reader sat like a retired animal, belt looped through a gate of cameras, rollers wearing their history in a gloss of rubber. A safety decal showed a cartoon hand caught between cylinders, grinning in a way that suggested litigation. "Humming," I said. It was faint at first, under the building's breath, but there, a filament of sound that carried through the metal into bone. Locke put 2 fingers to the casing, eyes half closed. "Team awake," he said, "like a boiler that refuses to admit the house is empty." I walked the machine the way you walk a patient. Hands, eyes, sequence. The feed plate wore a rash of shallow crescents, micro scratches from soft corners colliding with speed. Flecks of carbonized paper lay in the tray. When I skimmed a gloved fingertip and held it to the light, the black dust glittered. The guide rollers had left arcs of pressure on the belt so clean you could measure them with a ruler. "Keen's bruising matches these radii," I said. I set my phone on macro and took photos, working the angles until the belt became a map. He fed something here, or someone fed him. Locke had a panel open with the care of a polite thief. Inside, neat wiring from another decade, and spliced onto it with expensive indifference, a timer relay housing a coin cell battery and a tag printed with a smiley king, cut from a sheet of second-class stamps. "Adorable," he said, "a hobbyist's timer disguised as stationery." "When does it wake?" I asked. He tilted the relay toward the sodium light. "Midnight +3. "Keen's stamp said midnight," I said. "Keen was a headline," Locke replied. "The footnote says, sought after the CCTV rotates." Lestrade paced the aisle with his hands behind his back the way guilt paces a border. "Tell me what it does when it wakes." Locke closed the panel and wiped fingerprints he hadn't left. "It scans anything on the feed and assigns a sought-for-none route. Officially, that means undeliverable. Unofficially, someone has trained a dead system to do a live trick." A wire basket stood under the exit chute, half full of tidy envelopes that had never been touched by a bureau. No addresses, no return. The faces wore stamps like jewellery, some modern, some antique, some commemorative, so quaint they looked like lies. Each rim was freckled with dots too fine for chance. I lifted one. The paper had the cheap bravery of mass mail. Along the perforation, careful, mocking, tiny marks rode the teeth where thumbs never stray. "One-time pads in the margins," I said. "Printed in micro before the stamp is gummed," Locke said, pleased. "Then postmarked by the world, elegant. The message lives where the machine looks, not where people do." Lestrade watched me tilt the envelope under my penlight. "And what do the freckles say?" Locke took a quick photo through a loop clipped to his phone. The screen resolved, the freckles stopped pretending, and letters arrived. "N7, door 5, no route, no log." "Orange Yorks?" I asked. "Wheeled cages," Lestrade said. "Most are red metal. Orange straps mean quarantine or repair. N7 is the North Dispatch. Door 5 is door 5. "No log makes my skin itch," I said. "Good." Locke slid the envelope back exactly where it had sat, corners perfect. "Let's watch the trick." We waited. Waiting in places like that is never empty. The building counts without you. Somewhere above, a late forklift sighed. A distant bell pecked once at the hour. The air learned the temperature of midnight. At 03, the reader woke as if yawning under its breath. Cameras ticked. The belt shivered and then ran, not fast, not slow, just certain. The relay's LED pulsed exactly like a heartbeat. The stack of blank-faced letters breathed forward one by one. The machine didn't need addresses. It read the rims, the bar fences, the perforation music. A label printer, hidden under a hood, coughed out tags with an economy I envied. Each tag carried a rote that wasn't supposed to exist. DL, DL, a dead letter cascade, followed by a string of numbers that pretended to be random and weren't. The labels kissed the envelopes, and the envelopes fell into a gravity chute that swallowed them into the floor. "Where does the chute go?" I asked. "Under the building," Lestrade said. "Legacy tunnels. Nixie rooms, if you like American slang. We call them the return office. Closed years ago." "It's open tonight," I said. Locke fed the machine a test without announcing it. He took a blank, licked a stamp like a sinner, and with a red pen drew a single precise diagonal in the upper left corner. No text, no address, just a mark that would mean nothing to a human and everything to a reader tuned to the wrong song. "Bait," I said. "Echo," he said. "If the postmaster is watching the line, he'll see my angle where Keynes would have been. He'll reply because men like him cannot help but be tidy." Lestrade didn't say don't. He has learned where no lives. The belt carried Locke's echo into the mouth. The cameras blinked. The printer coughed. The chute took it, indifferent. The lights along the aisle did a small, thoughtful flicker. A separate printer, a stubby thermal box near the service panel, woke without being asked and spat a ghost of a receipt. No job ID, no operator code. Just 4 words. "Keep your hands clean." Locke's mouth thinned. "He's here," he said. "Not in the room, in the route." "Translate," Lestrade said. "Someone is listening to the optical output with a device that thinks it's a label printer," Locke replied. He lifted the slip with gloved fingers. "He's using the building's language because it's the only one this network speaks." The belt stopped as neatly as a breath that has found a reason to hold. The relay's LED calmed. The reader went to sleep. "Orange Yorks," I said. "N7, door 5. Lestrade checked his watch. 3 minutes, he said. "If we are very lucky, we walk past a thing that looks like a mistake." We weren't lucky. We were observed. Up on the dispatch floor, light returned in rectangles. Loading bays, the long throat where lorries kiss and leave. Most Yorks wore Royal Mail red, lined in rows like pews. To the left, a stack of orange-strapped cages waited against a wall marked quarantine. A single cage stood out where it shouldn't have. Orange strap, door 5, a handwritten tie-on that read N7 in a rushed, unconfident hand. Lestrade walked like a man who had borrowed permission and intended to return it before anyone noticed. I kept a step behind him, the way you do when you want a uniform to absorb the angle of scrutiny. Locke let his gaze skate off cameras and men on smoke breaks. At the cage, the strap had been tucked but not sealed, the sort of near-miss that belongs to either an amateur or a professional who wants you to think amateur. Inside, sealed mailbags, not many, all stamped undeliverable, all tagged to the dead-letter office that officially no longer existed. One bag had a bulge near the throat, like a swallowed sentence. "Quickly," Lestrade said. He turned his back and coughed for the cameras. I popped the tie, eased 2 inches of canvas back, and slid my hand into the mouth. My fingers found paper corners, string, the cool hum of plastic. I closed on the plastic and drew out a small, square device married to a heat sink, the sort of clandestine wonder sold as a barcode verifier to men who like credible invoices. Locke whistled once under his breath. "Optical demodulator," he said. "Reads the micro on the stamp as if it were radio. Stores the payload. Physical air gap closed by legs and petrol." A slip of thermal paper clung to the device as if embarrassed to be seen. 4 words again. New ones. "You brought a doctor." My name arrived next, unasked, unprinted by us, neat in capitals as if the postmaster had learned to write at school desks that smelled of polish. Jar Watson. He knew the route. He knew the wall. He knew the bench. "Seal it," Lestrade said softly. "We take the interpreter. We don't touch the bags." I resealed the strap. Exact knot, exact tuck. The cameras watched us not at all or entirely. I couldn't tell which version I preferred. As we turned for the stair, a forklift paused and the driver stared. Not at us, at the place behind us we had made empty. He scratched his cheek with one finger and moved on. Back in B2, the reader sat innocent as a dog that has just eaten a ham. The relay's LED was dark. The thermal printer had spat one last stub while we were gone. No words this time, just a timestamp. "Appointments," Locke said. "We have one." "Where?" Lestrade asked. Locke tilted the stub to the light. The edges of the paper weren't clean. Along the cut, the thermal overlay had lifted in a neat repeating saw, tooth pattern. He held it against the "keep your hands clean" slip. The saw matched, forming a tiny crown when the two edges touched. He smiled, tired and hungry. "Postman's Park," he said. "Where else do dead letters get read?" "Housekeeping," Lestrade said. "Leave nothing you didn't mean to bring." I glanced at the OLR one last time. On the feed plate, one black dot of ink sat alone, perfect, like a period at the end of a sentence no one had written yet. I collected it with tape and folded the tape into my notebook. "Midnight plus 11, Locke said, slipping the demodulator into a bag that had once carried oranges. "The postmaster prefers punctuality." "Then let's be rude," I said. "Let's arrive early." Chapter 3. The Appointment. We went early. Postman's Park keeps its own weather after midnight. Rain that falls more softly, lamps that measure time in amber, the memorial tiles glistening like teeth. Lestrade took up residence at the gate with 2 uniforms and the expression of a man who'd mislaid a regulation and intended to find it before dawn. He let Locke and me ghost the garden. "Cameras on Aldersgate," he murmured, not looking at us. "City feed loops every 8 minutes. You have a window between polite lies." Locke nodded and drifted, hands in pockets, the demodulator in a bag he'd disguised with oranges that no longer existed. I chose the shelter under the tiles, the one that makes office workers talk quieter. The bench where Edmund Keane had sat looked recently wiped, as if grief left fingerprints. Glowed on my phone in numbers that pretended to be neutral. I killed the radio on everything that could be tempted. The demodulator we'd lifted hummed faintly inside its foil nest, insulated against the postmaster's habit of erasing conversations at a distance. "Explain what we expect," I said softly. "Old route," Locke replied, eyes on the memorial wall. "If you're running a physical network, you need collection points with plausible reasons to exist. Pillar boxes, dead letter chutes, memorials, because nobody argues with grief. And at 6, something comes or goes. We are either in the way or interesting." "Which do you prefer?" "Interesting," he said, and smiled without warmth. "It lasts longer." The rain thickened and then thought better of it. Somewhere a siren tried to remember why it had been called. The park drew itself smaller. A van rolled past on Little Britain, tyres whispering. Not police, not nothing. The sort of white van companies hire when they mean to be invisible and choose badly. It didn't stop. A minute later, a man arrived on foot from the service alley by the old telephone exchange. Mid-40s, compact, cap pulled low, the anonymous jacket of anyone paid weekly. He pushed a mail-sack trolley whose canvas had been cut down and resewn into discretion. He approached the memorial wall as if to read. He didn't read. He knelt, slid his hand into the shadow between 2 benches, and came up with a square iron key that had learnt its manners in a different century. Not a skeleton. The post office crown on its head, teeth filed by a careful, impatient hand. "Pillar box key," Locke breathed. "Crown pattern, older cut." The man fitted the key into the stone plinth beneath the tiles where the Victorians once imagined a donation slot might sit. Stone that was meant to be solid, parted on a seam. Inside, no charity box. A steel throat, clean. He hooked a pouch from his trolley, fed it into the throat, waited. A hiss more felt than heard. The pouch vanished like a thought swallowed. "Pneumatics?" I murmured. "In London?" "Gravity with ambition," Locke said. "Old GPO tunnels. Before fibre, they had air." The man reached back into the throat and drew out another pouch, tired canvas, undeliverable stamped in purple, a tie-on that read N705 in a tidy hand. He set it on the trolley, glanced once at the tiles as if trying to remember a name, and turned. "Evening," I said, stepping out of the shelter. He flinched, recovered, judged me for a civilian and Locke for the other thing. His gaze dropped to my gloves, my stance, the way I didn't block his path. He found Lestrade at the gate with the part of his eye that keeps people alive. "I'm late," he said. "London. Flat vowels sanded down by shop floors and weather." "For a funeral?" Locke asked pleasantly. "For a collection." "Name?" I asked. He looked at the pouch as if it might have an answer. "Nobody," he said. "We keep our hands clean." "Keane kept his clean," I said. "They made sure of it." I let the sentence rest. "He sent us a letter. A muscle jumped in his jaw. He kept his hands on the trolley. "Then you know enough not to be here." "At 011 Sixt?" Locke asked. He showed him the stub with the sawtooth crown. "You draw the hour," he said. "We measure it." The man weighed exit against theatre and chose neither. "If you came for Postmaster, you came wrong," he said. "The Postmaster doesn't come. The Postmaster routs." He shifted his weight. "And watches." "Watches how?" I asked. "As if you were a parcel," he said. "By weight, by where you've been, by how you were sealed." He nodded at my bag. "And by what you carry that you pretend you don't." "The demodulator?" Locke said. "We took your interpreter because your interpreter wrote my friend's name on a strip of heat." "You should put it back," the man said. "The system notices when a tooth is missing." "Then smile wider," Lestrade said from behind him. He'd moved without sound for a big man. The uniform stayed at the gate, given tasks like Horizon and Calm. Lestrade wore no high-vis now. The knight refused to argue with his coat. He held his hands open and empty in the sort of quiet that convinces rooms to sit. "Don't run," he said. "It makes a lie of reasonable doubt." "I'm not running," the man said. "I'm delivering. If I don't finish the route, someone else will, and you won't like their manners." "Try me," Lestrade said. The man looked past us at the tiles, at the names of men and women who had died for people they didn't know. He made a decision I recognized by the way his shoulders dropped a fraction. He reached into his jacket and produced a small tin the size of a palm, the king's head embossed on the lid in cheap relief. He pushed it across the bench to me. "For the doctor," he said, "because you'll open it gently." "What is it?" I asked. "Rubbings," he said. "Pads, one time. We print them into the picture so the machine believes in the hero. You want Postmaster? Write him a hero he can't ignore." Fake memorial. The thought arrived with the solidity of cold iron. A tile no one questioned. A story the city wanted to tell itself. Poison the route by making grief speak the wrong instruction. "Name," Lestrade said again, softer. The man's mouth started to form it. He never finished. It was tiny, the stutter in the air, a heat you feel on teeth, a high mosquito of electricity. He jerked once, exactly once, and folded with the clumsy care of a man learning stairs for the first time. The trolley rattled. The pouch slid. His cap skittered to the shelter's edge. I was on my knees before the cap stopped, 2 fingers at his carotid, the other hand finding the outline under his shirt where a monitor might be. No skin burn, no smell, just the wrongness of a heart that had been asked an impossible question and answered, "Yes, of course." "Impulse," I said. "Short. Close." I looked up into the ordinary park. "Where?" "Lamp," Locke said. "Or the throat." He said watches. He meant more than cameras. "Kill the power," Lestrade snapped, already moving. One uniform went for the switch box, the other for the van that wasn't nothing. The park exhaled as the lamps died. Night returned with opinions. I drew a magnet from my pocket, habit turned religion after too many devices had learnt to be helpful, and pressed it over the man's sternum, skin to skin, trying to bully whatever sat under his clavicle into giving up its argument. "Breathe," I said to him and to the dark. He did once, the sort of gasped insistence that gives hope bad ideas. His eyes found mine, not pleading, annoyed. "Tell me your name," I said, because names keep people in rooms. He shook his head a fraction. "Forgettable," he whispered. "Write a good tile." His gaze flicked past me to the pouch, to the crown key, to the bench where Keane had not chosen to die. Then the light in him folded. The magnet did nothing I could believe in. 2 cycles, 3. There is always a moment you must stop. I wanted to be the sort of doctor who disobeys physics. I wasn't. "Time," Lestrade said gently. I said it aloud because the world insists on labels. The park took the number without interest. The rain began again as if a switch had been returned to on. Locke had the pouch by then, like open enough to learn without ruining the order. Inside, 2 bundles of blank-faced letters tied with red string, each margin freckled with an alphabet only machines love, a smaller packet of stamps backed with microprint, and a sheet of tracing paper that had been rubbed over a memorial tile so often the letters shone. Hero text, dates, a border of dots you'd mistake for Victorian ornament if you wanted to. He put the tracing back where it had sat. Corners perfect. He left the stamps. He took the tin. "We lift the tin," he said to Lestrade. "We leave the route intact. If the postmaster is counting, he'll think his courier died clean." "And if he isn't counting?" Lestrade asked. He is always counting, Locke said. We covered the man with my coat. Lestrade made the call that begins forms and ends arguments. The uniforms treated the park like a church, cordon wide, voices low. The van that wasn't nothing failed to return. Under the shelter, I opened the tin. Inside, layers of thin vellum, charcoal rubbings of tiles I knew by heart. Alice Ayres, who saved children and fell. Mary Rogers, who died of burns to save her little girl. Names the city wears the way some people wear scars. Along each border, where Victorian vinework kern flowers make a grammar of remembrance, a second language had been added. Dots so delicate the charcoal had to be persuaded to find them. The pads, the keys. Choose a hero, Locke said softly. Write his bravery, print a pad in the vine. The machine reads the vine as wrote. We make our own tile, I said. The thought felt treasonous and necessary. We poison the exchange. We give the postmaster a letter. Even he cannot resist opening, Locke corrected. He closed the tin. And when he opens, we read his return address. Lestrade stood with his back to the tiles, eyes on the gate, the rain writing itself into his coat. Write fast, he said. Before he posts a reply with worse manners. At the edge of hearing, something in the throat under the plinth sighed once, like a room deciding it had held its breath long enough. The slot closed, as if it had never opened. The park remembered how to be a park. We left with the tin and a dead man's crown key. The tiles watched us go with their ordinary patience. Heroes who had drowned and burned for strangers refused to blink. Who do we make brave? I asked. Locke glanced at the wall, at names carved to outlast us. Someone who never existed, he said, so the city doesn't notice when we break his heart. Chapter 4. A Hero That Never Lived, Part 1. The old printworks in Clerkenwell still smelled of ink in the plaster, as if the walls had learned vowels from type. Locke clicked on a reluctant strip light, set the tin of rubbings on a scarred table and said, We don't copy a hero, we invent one. Name? I asked. None you'll find on a census. He nodded at me. You choose the act. I'll give him a vine that sings. I thumbed through the vellum, charcoal ghosts of the memorial tiles I knew by heart, and let the idea settle where it felt true. Thomas Forley, I said. Porter. Died saving a stranger during the Horseshoe Brewery flood, 1814. It never happened on this wall, but it happened in London. Good spine. Locke taped down a blank sheet and with a draftsman's patience built a tile from air, the border vine, the benefactor's Tudor curlicues, capitals tidy enough for grief. I wrote Forley's citation in block, counting my breaths against every word. Under the vine, Locke threaded a second language, dots so fine they were only there when you stopped trying to see them. Our pad, hidden in ornament, read, Post to Nixie, B2, door 9, no log, return address requested. The pad matches nothing in the tin, he said. If Postmaster indexes his rubbings, he'll have to touch this one. Touch means time. Time means we watch him work. And stamps. From a brown paper bundle bought for cash, he lifted sheets of definitives. We silk-screened their white margins with freckles, our pad's twin, dried them under a sulking desk fan, and trimmed 6 clean baits. The demodulator we'd stolen hummed when he passed it near. Its screen winked. Pad, Farley VP. OK. Lestrade arrived without knocking, balancing a cardboard tray of tea. Half the city thinks I'm in licensing. The other half thinks I'm Overtime's ghost, he said. Tell me we're committing a charming fraud and not sedition. Charming fraud, Locke said, with teeth. We built the letter. Blank A4 for weight, our doctored stamp kissing the corner, an address line left elegantly empty in a way only machines admire. I drew a faint diagonal in the upper left, Locke's echo mark. We sealed. He killed the light. He told us 0116, he murmured. We answer at 07 and make him decide whether to be tidy. Postman's Park had polished its regrets for the night. Under the shelter the tiles shone as if the city had decided memory should be waterproof. Lestrade watched the gate with a coat that negotiated with weather and men. Locke knelt by the plinth as if for a shoelace. The crown key turned with the polite complaint of old iron. The slot yawned. He slid our letter in, held it a fraction past good manners and let go. A hiss, a swallow. Then he fed the vellum rubbing, our forged tile, after it. This is the poetry, he said. He can't read the stamp without the vine, and he can't touch the vine without putting his fingers on our lie. We waited. The lamp above the plinth dimmed to a softer orange, blinked and went out for a quarter second, the sort of nod old circuits give new friends. In that stutter, the slot breathed again. A canvas pouch rose and rested, well behaved. Lestrade didn't move, his eyes did. Locke eased the tie, tilted the mouth toward me. Inside, a single envelope and an inked rubbing. The envelope wore our kind of stamp, and a label no official machine would own. Sought for none. No other marks. The rubbing wasn't ours. The vine sang a different key. In its curls and leaves, a second message hid in dots. You forge a hero. I prefer real ones. If you want a name, come alone. Nixie, B door 9, now. Bring the doctor. Lestrade's face did a brief. Civil war between absolutely not and of course. He's routing you into the basement, he said. Romantic or butcher? Both, I said. Locke slid the rubbing back, corners perfect, and closed the pouch like a cat returning to sleep. Door 9, he said. We've made our appointment. 2 steps behind, Lestrade decided. No radios. I interfere if someone forgets to breathe. Understood, Locke said. Spell it, Lestrade told me, because men like him keep the superstitions they can reach. Lestrade, I said, with a hyphen and an appetite. He almost smiled. Go. We walked out of the park with a crown key in my pocket, and the city pretending it was asleep. Now Chapter 4. A Hero That Never Lived, Part 2. Mount Pleasant breathed like a cathedral that had rented itself out. After-hours corridors smelt of dust and envelopes. The air downstairs was colder, as if the building kept its sinew in the basement. B2's lights came up in narrow sodium aisles. The OLR sat outside like a retired animal dreaming of belts. Door 9 wore a bolt it hadn't been born with. Locke tried the crown key first, then something thin that would have made a locksmith deliver a lecture. The bolt surrendered with a small, tired scrape. The room beyond was longer than it wanted to be. Ranks of hooks for mailbags, bars and rails, a floor painted a colour you only describe using food. At the far end, under a cruel lamp, a table waited. Label printer, coil of undelivered string, a demodulator twin to ours, and a kettle that didn't belong anywhere. Stay near breath, Locke murmured. He meant the door. I went with him anyway. On the table lay another rubbing, inked, confident. We turned it. The vine's ornament hid 4 words in the curls. Hands clean. Hands open. We showed our empty palms because theatre is sometimes medicine. Locke placed our stolen demodulator beside its twin. They hummed together like tuning forks agreeing. The label printer made a small satisfied sound and fed a line of thermal text. Good evening, Doctor. Good evening, Mr. Locke. Evening, Locke said. Postmaster, I presume? The printer purred, then offered. I don't like the hat, but it fits. You killed Keane, I said, and a courier in a park. That hat fits. The head counted in the printer's voice became brisk. Keane posted something he shouldn't. I returned him to sender. Sender? Locke asked mildly. A bank? A ministry? Or the little god you built out of cardboard and timing? If labels can be offended, this one was efficient about it. If you understood, you wouldn't be here. On the contrary, Locke said and raised his head a fraction. Inspector. Lestrade was a shadow in the doorway, 2 steps in, not 3, the doorframe agreeing to carry some of his weight. The room accepted him the way machine rooms accept boots that don't touch things. The printer clicked faster. You brought a policeman. You don't follow instructions. You invited the doctor, Lestrade said. You forgot she keeps me. Somewhere in the wall, a relay decided to have opinions. Outside, the OLR woke briefly and pretended it hadn't. The sodium lamp cooled a shade, as if remembering winter. The printer spat one more line. Then let's sort you. None. Behind Lestrade, the bolt threw itself forward. The door closed with an exact, almost polite finality. The lamp went a degree colder. Locke's eyes met mine. He looked very pleased. Good, he said. Chapter 5. None. The bolt's thud carried like a verdict. Air learned to listen. The sodium lamp over the table cooled a shade, turning our skin the colour of receipts. The label printer purred, fed a second line. Please stand still. Locke didn't. He leaned into the door, tested the bolt with 2 fingers like a doctor palpating bone. Electromag, he murmured. Old frame, new habits. I took a breath slow enough to count. The room smelt of paraffin and paper mould, of ducting that remembered coal. Somewhere behind the wall a belt turned once in its sleep and forgot why. Lestrade shifted his weight against the jamb, making the frame agree to hold him. Options, he said. Postmaster wants us sorted, Locke said, eyes on the printer. Undeliverable. The route is down. He set our stolen demodulator beside the table's unit and clipped a cable between their bellies, gentle as a midwife. The two little screens agreed in a hum I felt in my teeth. Thermal text uncoiled. Hands clean? Hands open? We raised our palms again. Theatre sometimes buys seconds. You built a church from dead machinery, Locke said conversationally to the printer. What's the sermon? A flicker of heat, then. Systems fail where people don't. I moved names through soft hours. You arrived with sirens. You kill, I said. Dead letters deserve use. The printer's head ticked left-right, impatient. The OLR outside hiccuped and fell still. Locke put his mouth close to the plastic as if confiding in a shy dog. Rout us, then. The head paused as if surprised to be obeyed. Text arrived like a smirk. None. The floor answered. A low iron cough came up through my boots. A square of paint, 2 shades darker than the rest, shivered at the room's centre, cracked along a seam, and lifted to reveal a hatch with a recessed brass ring. Wind, old and dry, breathed out of it as from a chest long held. Lestrade's hand went to his sidearm and then away. Guns have nothing to say to doors. Absolutely not, he said very calmly. 2 steps behind, Locke reminded him, equally calm. And down counts as a step. He reached for the ring and stopped an inch short. Doctor. I crouched. The brass was cold. A flake of red paint came away under my glove like dried blood. I pulled. The hatch lifted obediently, its hinges complaining in a thin voice. Below, a steep steel ladder and a tunnel throat lit in short, stingy segments. The rungs glistened with the grease of other hands. Mail rail, I said. The childhood trivia rose unbidden. The old GPO railway, driverless cars that once shot letters under the city like thoughts. You've wired yourself to a ghost train. The printer approved. You read. Occasionally, I said. Locke unspooled a strap from an orange York in the corner, webbing meant to hold canvas mouth shut, and belted it to the hatch ring, then to the leg of the table, twice, like a tourniquet. If he slams on my manners, he said. He looked at Lestrade. I go first, then the doctor. Count to 20. If we're not lying about being fine, follow. Lestrade's mouth made a line that had learned to be law. 10, he said. Locke grinned. Quick, thin, fair. He swung onto the ladder and slid the last 4 rungs like someone who had once grown up with bad ideas and lived. Clear came up, tinny. I went after him, the hatch's breath on my neck. The tunnel took my weight, then my eyes, the light stepping away in miserly squares. The air down there had a museum's temperature and a cellar's opinion. We landed on a narrow platform cut from poured concrete. To our left, a low-gauge track curved into a dark that wasn't empty. On the rail sat a maintenance trolley, a square of metal with a battered seat, a control box stamped with a crown that had been sanded nearly smooth, and a handle whose rubber grip remembered other hands. Locke put the crown key into a slot that pretended to be unrelated. It turned with a soft click of old consent. The trolley woke tiredly. A tiny ammeter twitched. On the wall, a signal lamp changed from nothing to a small, polite green. The label printer upstairs clattered again, its voice echoing into the tunnel like gossip down a pipe. Car 2. Door 9. Route none, EX. Lestrade's boots hit the platform behind me. He looked at the trolley as if it had just offered to represent him in court. You are not getting on that toy without a warrant and a crash helmet. I brought a doctor, Locke said. Best helmet there is. He glanced at the control box. X is exchange. Dead letter exchange, I said. He nodded once, pleased, and then less pleased. We may be the dead letters. He straddled the trolley as if it were a stubborn mule. I took the seat. There is a dignity to committing to a bad idea quickly. Lestrade set himself at the rear step, hands on the rail, the posture of a man who will be difficult to remove and intends difficulty to be a program, not a bug. Brace, Locke said softly. He nudged the handle. We moved. The trolley didn't roar. It threaded itself into the tunnel like a thought. Quiet, certain, a hum that sat just the wrong side of hearing. The light strips played fair for 20 meters, then grew intermittent, then became memory. Locke clipped a lamp to his coat and let it draw an ellipse on brick and cable and repetition. At the first turnout, the trolley slowed itself and sniffed. On the brick just above the rail, a rectangle of white paint wore a row of fresh dots along its bottom edge. Locke leaned, held the demodulator close. Its screen found the pad and translated without fuss. Slow. Count. 7 ascend. Count. Do noppens if we touch? Lestrade asked. Clean hands, Locke said. He didn't smile. We slowed. We counted 7. We did not touch. The tunnel widened briefly into a brick chamber where a ladder ran up into the dark. The demodulator chimed again at an overhead pad. Ascend B2 D7, B2 E2 D9. Open. Doors 7, 8, 9, I said. Our floor. He's reading us as stock. Undeliverable stock, Locke said. Sorted for none. We passed under the 3 shafts in sequence. Cold air breathed down each like a lapsed prayer. At D9 open, the trolley hesitated, as if being inspected by a clerk who enjoyed his job. A sound like a bolt, considering regret, whispered through the brick. The trolley rolled on. Lestrade? I asked. 2 steps, he said. Behind. Still counting. We plunged. The line fell a few meters and levelled. A small roller coaster built by men who did not enjoy fun. Somewhere water talked to itself. The brick changed colour by confidence rather than dye. In the demodulator's glow, the next pad announced itself like an ambush. EX aft hold clean before entry hands open. Locke throttled back. The trolley coasted into a cavern cut wider than the others and stopped at a painted line. On the wall beyond, someone had stenciled exchange in letters that had learnt to be authority. The room beyond the line was lit the way crime thinks daytime looks. Racks of obsolete readers lined the walls like retired soldiers facing a parade. In the centre, on an island of benches, sat a skeleton of a sorting frame dressed in modern cables, a mash-up of errors that made my teeth ache. A single chair waited, turned toward us. Beside it, a label printer, patient. No people. Not yet. The printer clicked, pleased with itself. Hands clean. Soap, Lestrade growled. Ultrasonic, Locke said, pointing at 2 round dishes on the bench, pale basins with a waterline the colour of dilution. He slipped off his gloves, slid his hands in. The dishes buzzed, a dental noise. He lifted them out. The skin looked ordinary, except for the smell of metal teased thin. Now yours, Doctor, the printer encouraged. I obeyed. The vibration climbed my bones. The water made no ripple. When I withdrew my hands, they tasted like coins to my nose. Lestrade glared at the basins. I will not be marinated. The printer agreed. Policemen are dirty by design. Lestrade's mouth twitched. Printers got jokes. From somewhere behind the racks came the smallest sound, the hurrying foot of a mouse, the breath of a man who has decided not to be heard. Locke's head tilted. Counter, he whispered. Meaning, I asked. He'll come where the parcels come, Locke said, to see the weight. A door I hadn't seen unstitched from the wall. A figure stepped through in a mailroom coat that had been tailored by a man who missed uniforms, neither tall nor short, ordinary the way certain predators are. Rubber gloves. No hat. Doctor, he said, voice clean, vowels filed as if he'd been taught by committees. Mr. Locke, Inspector. He did not look at the printer. He looked at our hands. Thank you for coming by route, he said. It makes accounting so much easier. Locke's face lit with that particular pleasure he reserves for puzzles that have decided to introduce themselves. Postmaster, he said warmly. At last. Chapter 6. Return address requested. He wore ordinary-like armour, mailroom coat tailored by someone who missed uniforms, rubber gloves a shade too clean, haircut that wanted to be invisible. His eyes did the counting people do when they've spent a life inside procedures. Hands, exits, the way weight sits on a floor. Doctor, he said. Mr. Locke, Inspector Lestrade. The vowels had been sanded in committee. You kill tidy, I said. I route, he answered. When people try to post themselves through the wrong slot, they tear. I prevent tearing. Locke tilted his head almost friendly. You stopped Keen tearing by switching off his heart. He triggered a fail-safe, Postmaster said, as if reading a manual. Hands dirty, sending material without clearance. Lestrade took 2 measured steps along the wall, not losing the door. Try manslaughter into the tape. We'll tidy the charge sheet later. Postmaster's gaze flicked to the ultrasonic basins, then back to our fingers. Thank you for washing. It makes the instruments honest. Ultrasonic doesn't clean, Locke murmured for me. It lays a conductive film. Your hands become a key. Anything you touch is authorized or punishable. Postmaster didn't deny it. Every system that lives must know skin from glove. So, Locke said lightly, let's talk about skin. He unclipped our demodulator from the bench and patted the table's twin as if introducing cousins. A cable clicked between them. The little screens harmonized. On the island of steel, the label printer purred and fed a slip. Fawley VP, accepted route, none. Ex-return address, pending. Postmaster's mouth twitched, the smallest, most human loss of temper. You forged a hero, he said to me. You wrote nonsense into the vine. London collects nonsense, I said. We put it to work. Locke's thumb tapped a key he'd taped over on the demodulator, an ugly little button that said nothing and meant export. He didn't look at Postmaster when he tapped it. He looked at the printer. It obliged. Request received. Touchpad to complete. Postmaster's gloved hand hovered. He smiled once, privately, and reached, then stopped, a millimetre shy of contact, because men like him never quite do what you want when you want it. You'll have salted the pad with a second instruction, he said mildly. I touch your vine and you learn where my demodulator dreams at night. You don't touch, Lestrade said. Then we step into the open and discuss your dentistry with a jury. I don't do juries, Postmaster said. They prefer pictures. I prefer bars. He reached instead for a foot pedal hidden under the bench and pressed, lightly, as if ringing for tea. The room's breath changed, not theatrically. The way a lift changes its mind. A pressure the size of a cathedral made the sodium lamp flatter and the hairs on my wrists think of lightning. EM coil, I said, in the frame. Static only, he said, to remind your devices to be well behaved. The demodulators sulked but lived. Locke's mouth did the thin, pleased line. You can't keep power high down here, he said. Brick eats it, tunnels bleed it, the GPO rails soak it like bread. You don't kill people in rooms like this. You kill upstairs, where the lampposts have funding. Postmaster's eyes warmed by half a degree, approval, or the neighbour of it. Mr. Locke, he said softly, you were better as a roomer. Roomers don't ask for return addresses, Locke said, and tapped the taped key again. The demodulators chorused a small petulant beep. The printer ticked, pending, pending, pending. You'll stall, Lestrade said, conversational as if passing time at a bus stop. And then you'll run. Try the door. Find my shoulder. I don't run, Postmaster said. He pressed the pedal a second time. Somewhere behind us the hatch's strap creaked. Locke had belted it to the table. The table complained but held. Compromise, Locke suggested lightly. You give us a line that isn't yours. A borrowed coat. We borrow it back at breakfast. Why would I give you anything? Postmaster asked. Because you're vain, Locke said pleasantly. You built a network out of stamps and dead rooms and the city's grief. You want it understood, even as it dies. He shouldn't have said dies. The word put teeth in the air. Postmaster's attention returned to me. Dr. Watson, he said, you dragged field hospitals through places the world refused to map. You know what it costs to keep a ledger honest. I move people who cannot survive the ledger. Refugees, witnesses, men whose nations decided they were rounding errors. If you tear me up, some of them will bleed back into the daylight, screaming. Lestrade didn't flinch, and you moved money for men who put holes in other men to measure loyalty. Postmaster allowed himself the smallest shrug. Dead letter, live letter. System load must be balanced. Call it what it is, I said. You charge a toll for mercy and murder, and when the toll keeper speaks, hearts stop. He looked almost sad. There's always someone under the wheels. I taught the wheels to be selective. Locke's finger hovered over the taped key. Then be selective with us. Return address. Now. Postmaster smiled with weary amusement, reached into his pocket and produced a small rubber stamp. Office supply, squared off, engraved with a pattern that looked like nonsense even to me. He inked it on the back of his glove and pressed his thumb to the bench as if blessing it. A perfect crown formed in negative, a sawtooth pattern I recognized from the stubs upstairs. Authenticating the room, he said. He pressed his thumb again lightly against the edge of the paper pad where our Fawley vine waited. Not touching the pad, not giving the machine what it needed. Skirting it. Making a point. The printer, affronted, thought, then surrendered. Return address, Keel 3, bag drop, 30, tube 3. RTE, Pilgrimlock's nostrils flared, pleased, scenting not victory but a line. Key B, King Edward Building, he said. Post Office HQ before they made it a palace for accountants. PL, plate line, tube 3, Pilgrim Street access. Postmaster inclined his head. You see, when people are polite, rooms become helpful. Lestrade had already filed it behind his eyes. Uniforms at Pilgrim will be loud, he said softly. You'll choose Wapping instead. Old exchange under the river, a habit of yours. I detest river air, Postmaster said, lying. The label printer offered one last line in a tone I was starting to hear as humour. Please leave by the gift shop. The chair beside the bench turned a quarter-inch on its own, as if someone had nudged it with a knee. The door we hadn't used unstitched from the wall a second time. Beyond, the tunnel we'd ridden in on brightened in sedate segments, the way a patient in recovery opens eyes as nurses pass. You'll let us walk out, Locke said. I'll route you, Postmaster corrected. Your weight has been measured, your skin has been labelled. If you try to come back on the same ticket, the doors will misunderstand. And you? Lestrade asked. Postmaster gestured neatly at the frame and the racks and the centuries. I am the counter. Counters don't walk. You kill from lampposts, I said, so counters don't have to. He didn't answer. He had the look I've seen on surgeons when someone asks about God. Locke took my elbow. We have the return, he said, still mild, and a time. Walk, Lestrade agreed. We'll borrow company on the way up. We left. The printer made a contented domestic noise as we stepped over the painted line. The trolley woke without being told, rolled with the manners of a slow taxi. Behind us the door stitched itself back into the wall and became brick again. On the platform below B2, Lestrade put 2 fingers to his earpiece and then remembered he wasn't wearing one. Old habits do that. He breathed instead, slow once, as if sending a message through ribs. Units to King Edward Building, Pilgrim Street access, Tube 3, he said to the air. No sirens. Watch for a man who thinks he's a room. Will he run? I asked. He'll rout, Locke said. If we're lucky, he'll rout himself. And if we're unlucky? Then he routs someone else into the way. We climbed. The strap groaned where the hatch had tried to forget itself. The table had held. In the basement room, the sodium lamp pretended it had never doubted. The label printer sat quiet and smug. Lestrade worked the bolt. It released with the careful embarrassment of a trap that knows it's been seen. Up, he said, and don't touch any memorials you didn't bring. We moved through Mount Pleasant as if we had a right to be there, because acting like you do is often enough. Out in the cold, the city had decided on a different reign. Lestrade's phone, a brick too stubborn to be smart, vibrated twice with news from people who owed him things. Pilgrim Street's awake, he said. Keys, shutters, ghosts. Good, Locke said. Then Postmaster will need a new door. I looked down at my hands. The skin still tasted of coins. He marked us, I said. Locke nodded. We marked him back. Is that enough? I asked. For now, he said. Return address requested. Return address received. Next. He turned his face into the rain, smiling the thin smile I had learned to trust. We write a letter he can't route anywhere but a cell. Chapter 7. Pilgrim King Edward Building had the kind of face that tells you to lower your voice. Granite eyebrows, a stone crown that remembered cues and ration books. Pilgrim Street crouched in the rain. Lestrade parcelled his people into the dark with a finger and a look. One at the loading bay, one on the corner tobacconist, one who became a rubbish sack against a wall. Quiet, he said. No blue lights, no heroics unless they're paperwork. We went in by a door that still wore a brass GPO plate, down a corridor that smelled of envelopes and old polish. Tube 3 lived behind a steel gate that had learned patience, cast-iron mouth, a stamped crown, a throat that went down and then sideways into London's old lungs. A painted wayplate sat before it like a doormat. A small sign in faded red still threatened dismissal for unauthorized bag handling. In the ceiling, a camera blinked with respectable boredom. 0130, Locke murmured. His watch had never forgiven him for anything. It kept good time out of spite. He crouched and traced the wayplate's edge with a gloved finger, then held his hand over the gate without touching. Feel it? I breathed. The air over the iron tasted of pennies. Static, I said. Out of a coil behind the lip, he said. A kiss for the unwary. Enough to persuade a heart with bad habits. He used a plastic hook to pull the wayplate an inch. A hair of copper flashed beneath, sweet and wicked. He pressed 2 stamps, our doctored margins, across the contact. Insulate the insult, he said, and smiled the thin, guilty smile that means we are still alive. Somewhere deep in the wall, metal spoke to metal. The throat hummed. The mouth coughed a canvas pouch up as politely as a cat returning contraband to a child. Lestrade's shoulder filled the doorway and then did not. He is very good at being a door. Locke didn't let me touch the bag. He slid the plastic hook through the tie and drew it to the table, avoiding the wayplate's centre like a surgeon avoiding pride. He opened the canvas mouth exactly enough. Inside, 2 bundles of blank-faced letters tied with red string, a smaller pouch stitched from old mailbag in a different hand, and a hard case the size of a paperback, foam cut to cradle something that had opinions. He lifted the case. A stamp sat under its clasp, our freckles, our Vine expected. The demodulator hummed when he brought it close and translated the dotted margin for us. RT, Wapping, Bay 6 time, fifths clean, alone. Lestrade's expression clouded with relief and fury. Told you he'd choose River Air, he said. He's sentimental about damp. We don't go alone, I said. We go convincingly alone, Locke said, and not by the front door. He opened the smaller pouch with 2 fingers and a superstition. It contained a coil the size of a cigarette packet married to a button cell and 3 leads that wanted to be a question. The coil's varnish smelled warm, though it wasn't. Secondary kiss, I said. Local, he agreed. A pocket arrhythmia. He unplugged the cell with tweezers and bled the coil's temper out on the bare table. The camera watched and pretended not to learn. The heavy case held a demodulator twin to ours, but handsomer, with a proper metal shell and a crown-lipped lens. Its serial plate had been filed off with attention. Locke ran a nail along the seam and found a notch barely worth the name. The hinge complained and yielded. Inside, the board wore its components like jewels, and a slip of paper tucked under the foam like a man's conscience. He eased the paper free, not a rubbing, a receipt. KEB PL3, service. Then a crown stamp I recognized from the thermal stubs, and 5 neat dots in a row at the bottom edge, too regular to be buyer's initials. He held it under the pen light. The dots resolved themselves into letters you could only see if you didn't blink. Gift shop. Upstairs, Lestrade said grimly. Souvenir stamps and respectable crime. Later, Locke said, Wapping first. He retied the canvas exactly as he'd found it. We left the pouch and the letters, took the handsome demodulator and the coil's temper, and made the gate look untouched by making it more itself. Lestrade radioed without a radio, the way men like him send messages through silence. His people rearranged themselves on the street by not moving. At 02, the river in my head turned up its collar. Wapping keeps its breath close to the ground. Brick sweats salt, and the old tunnel mouths looked like lies that forgot they were meant to be kind. Bay 6 was where the market had once breathed. After-hours tech, ugly coffee, transactions that involved skill and no receipts. The shutters were down now, the renovation sign doing the hard work of pretense. A side door that hadn't learned the new hours sat a metre off the wet. Hands clean, Locke said. We had scrubbed in the KEB's washroom with soap that smelled of government and left our gloves in a bin that said linen with missionary optimism. Our skin still tasted of coins. I hated that I could tell. Locke used the crown key without a theatre, the door considered and lost. Inside, a corridor that angled under the street toward the old exchange. The lights had been set to a tender dim. Someone who liked being a room had thought about mood. We moved as if we belonged, because pretending is a kind of belonging, and found Bay 6 dressed like a confession booth, a stainless steel table, 2 chairs, a label printer, a demodulator cradle with a crown-lip lens and an urn that pretended to be tea. The river made a noise like old men talking. Alone, I said. Alone enough, Locke said, and let Lestrade stop 2 doors back and become architecture. We set the handsome demodulator in the cradle with the care of a gift returned within 30 days. The label printer woke, yawned, and printed a single line that tasted like condescension. Hands clean? Locke showed his palms. So did I. The printer fed a second slip, the same words as if manners were a ritual. Hands clean? Touchy, he murmured, and let the machine smell his skin without letting it have a fingerprint. The demodulator's little screen blinked. A menu appeared, 4 headings pretending to be innocent. Ledger Roots, Orth Hart. I looked at Hart. He looked at Ledger. We are who we are. Not yet, he whispered. If we open his book, he'll slam the covers. The printer ticked again. Please be seated. Return address confirmation in progress. He's watching, I said. Good, Locke said, and moved our chair a fraction so its legs made a pattern on the floor tiles that I did not understand, and he absolutely did. A footstep in the corridor. Not hurried, not loud. The sort of pace men use when they have already decided how the scene ends. 2 steps, Lestrade breathed, nowhere and very close. A man in a mailroom coat walked in, the same cut as Postmaster's, but wrong in a way a tailor would call soul. Younger, leaner, eyes that wouldn't be ordinary in good light. He wore rubber gloves and the smile people put on when they intend to be briefly polite. "Hands clean," he said. "Alone?" "Alone," Locke said amiably. "Postmaster sends apologies," the man said. "Counters don't walk." He looked at our demodulator as if it were a pet that might sulk. "Return address reconfirmed." "Name?" I asked. He considered lying, then chose procedure. "Pell," he said, as in Bill, as in unfortunate. "Courier," Locke said. "Do you like the hat?" "It keeps the rain off," Pell said. "Keane wore it badly," I said. "He wore it loudly," Pell corrected. "He tried to write 2 letters at once." He reached for the handsome demodulator. "Careful," Locke said pleasantly. "It bites." "So do I," Pell said, and his thumb brushed the crown-lip lens. The room changed its mind. The label printer fed a thick strip of text at a speed that would have embarrassed any sensible machine. Auth, present, route confirmed. RT Wapping X, Pilgrim, active. "Thank you," Locke said softly. "We just needed to know which door your counter uses when it thinks no one is looking." Pell blinked once, the first unprofessional thing he'd done. Then the rubber gloves tightened, the smile stayed, and the room turned violent. Chapter 8. Gift shop hours. The room changed its mind. Pell's smile held while his thumb flicked the underside of the table. A foot pedal kissed metal. The stainless surface prickled under my palms. The air took on the taste of hot pennies. "Coil," I said. "Under the lip," Locke answered, already moving the way people do when they've rehearsed against electricity. Off the floor, off the edge. Chair kicked back so its rubber feet sat on the tiles he'd chosen earlier. He hadn't been fidgeting in Chapter 7. He'd been drawing a safe square. Pell pressed again. The demodulator's screen glitched and sulked. A filament of steadier hum rose from the table. Focused, mean, more medical than theatrical. "Don't," I told Pell, voice level. "You'll stop a heart and never know which." "That's the experiment," he said. Lestrade arrived as a change in weather. 2 doors back, then 1, then inside the room with a weight that argued with doors. Pell's eyes flicked past us and made a decision. He reached for his pocket. "Hands," Lestrade said. Pell's rubber glove closed on a coil the size of a matchbox, married to a button cell and 3 neat leads, a cousin of the one from King Edward's tube mouth, but tuned crueler. "Local arrhythmia," I said. "Short pulse. Don't let it touch skin." Pell snapped the leads like a conjurer, one to the stainless table, one to the demodulator's crown-lip cradle, one lifted, poised. The coil whined, close to my teeth, nearer to my chest. "Evelyn," Locke said softly. I slid my hand to the urn. It was real steel under its pretense. I tipped it, hard. The lid clapped. The urn rolled. Metal kissed metal. Pell flinched as the table took a bigger ground than he had allowed for. The coil spit blue and died with a petulant pop. Lights blinked. The breaker didn't. Pell moved. He was fast and practiced in rooms with furniture. He caught Locke's wrist and twisted for the demodulator. Locke gave the wrist and took the glove, peeling it half off as if he were helping. Skin shows where rubber breaks. The glance of flesh on steel made a mean little crackle. Pell swore through his teeth, angry at physics. Lestrade's shoulder took Pell in the ribs like a bureaucrat finally signing a form. They hit the table. The label printer skittered and burped a strip. "Hands clean?" Pell answered by headbutting Lestrade square on the brow. Clean, deliberate. Lestrade's eyes watered, but the world stayed in focus. He returned the courtesy with a polite, devastating jab to the diaphragm that took Pell's breath without excess. The glove finished coming off. Pell got one hand on the handsome demodulator and tried to twist the crown-lip lens like a key. Locke let him, and then turned the device into the grip with a small, precise movement that used Pell's own force to bury the crown teeth into Pell's palm. Skin met metal, metal met residual coil. The room snapped like a damp towel. Pell jerked. Not a showy convulsion, a sharp inward stutter, the kind that leaves hearts looking for the next beat and not finding it. "Down," I said, already moving. Pell folded, I followed, heel of my hand centered on bone. "Lock, magnet." He had one because we live like that. I slapped it over Pell's sternum, skin to skin, bullying currents into nonsense. 2 cycles, 3. Rhythm returned wrong, then less wrong, then sufficient. "Stay," I told Pell's heart, stern as a matron. I glanced up. Cuffs. Lestrade obliged, wrists forward. Pell tried a roll that might have worked on a worse floor. It didn't. The cuff ratchet's tidy chatter joined the river's old men talk. Locke had the handsome demodulator open before I finished a 4th cycle. He didn't need a Torx. He had a trick with his thumbnail and an improvised wedge cut from the urn's lid. The board lifted. Under it, a micro SD wore tape like modesty. "Gift shop," he murmured, and popped the card into a little reader of his own that had never been fashionable. The screen on his aging laptop flickered to a directory tree with the kind of authority you only get from confident crimes. Ledger, Routes, Auth, Hart. "We don't pull the book," he said, half to himself. "We pull the index." He scraped Routes and Auth, file names that began Key BPL3, Pilgrim T3, WAP EXB6, and deeper in, GFT shop plate lib B/. There it was. The thing the receipt had whispered, gift shop, a plate library, where pads were printed into stamp margins with a smile. Lestrade had Pell sitting against the stainless with the performed dignity of a man who isn't bleeding and would like it noted. Pell blinked, swallowing air in sections. I watched his pulse in his throat. "Don't do anything heroic," I said, "unless it involves staying alive." "You'll," Pell started, then stopped, recalculating. He tried contempt. "You'll tear the exchange. Do you even know what leaks back when you break a room like this?" "People," I said. "Some will catch, some will shelter. Some you were killing with neat words." Pell's mouth twitched. We were stopping the wrong letters reaching the wrong desks. "You were selling direction," Lestrade said, "with fatalities." Locke slid the SD card into a Faraday sleeve. "Where's your plate?" he asked Pell, not unkindly. "Upstairs at KEB or the tourist trap at Mount Pleasant?" Pell looked at the demodulator cradle as if it might answer for him. It did, in its way. The label printer coughed a single thin strip. "Gift shop, K3, plain, Crown, F14. "Thank you," Locke said to the room. Pell made a small, defeated sound. "Counters don't walk," he repeated, as if it were a faith. "Then stop trying the door," Lestrade advised and spoke to the air the way old policemen do. "1 to custody at Bay 6. Quiet lift. No radios. Bring a blanket that looks like mercy." He glanced at me. I checked Pell again. Pupils, skin, the tremor that tells you which way a body intends to go. "He'll live. He'll hate it." "Good," Lestrade said. We left Pell breathing, and the room offended. On the way out, the demodulator's menu flashed bold for the first time as if a hand elsewhere had pressed a key. "Heart." "Don't," I told Locke. "Not here," he agreed. He dug in the drawer under the crown lip cradle and found the thing rooms like this always hide, a stamped rubber crown, a little pot of black. He pressed the crown on a strip of blank label and stuck it to the table leg. "Why?" I asked. "To clutter his count," he said. "Let the room remember too many crowns. Postmaster likes tidy." Outside, the river pretended it had never watched us. Rain came on thin and slant, the kind that erases chalk. Lestrade set his jaw in the way that passes for courage when you've got forms to file later. "Gift shop," he said. "King Edward. 3 a.m. "Plate library," Locke answered. His eyes had that bright high note I had learned to trust only when there was no other choice. "If we pull the plate he prints the vine with, the Crown F14, we salt his entire alphabet." "And if he has another plate?" I asked. "Then we pickpocket the blessing," he said, "and make the till ring the wrong hymn." Lestrade touched the knot above his brow where Pell's head had written a brief biography. "You know there'll be people upstairs," he said, very even. "Uniforms we don't want shot at. Cameras that don't forget. Managers who like lists." "Then we'll sell them a souvenir," Locke said. He lifted the Faraday sleeve with the micro SD as if it weighed more than a room. One that says, "Close for stocktake." The city turned one more minute. The past in its brick yawned and kept breathing. The future down in its tunnels wanted to be a timetable. My hands still tasted of coins. "Wash," I said. We did at a tap behind a shutter that read renovation and meant don't ask. The water was cold and honest. It took the metallic taste and left skin. I watched it run, thinking of hands and keys and pads hidden in vines, of names routed through soft hours. Lestrade said, pocketing his stubborn phone, "We buy a stamp. Chapter 9. Stocktake King. Edward Building wore its crown like a warning. At 2:47 the forecourt was rain and hush. The philatelic gift shop sat behind glass that made souvenirs look like evidence. Lestrade scattered his people with a finger and a look, one on Pilgrim, one by the loading bay, one who became a hoarding in bad light. 10 minutes, he said. If you're still shopping after that, I invent a policy. We went in by a staff door that remembered polish. Security's desk lamp glowed over crossword squares. The guard's pen traced a 7 into a 9 and called it done. Locke showed him a laminated smile none of us believed. The man waved us through on the authority of night. Inside, a museum of paper pretending to be a shop. Commemoratives under glass. Definitive sheets in drawers with little brass tongues. Behind, a counter where a label printer slept and a receipt roll waited to tell lies about VAT. The far door led to what the floor plan called prep. Racks, inks, a silk-screen carousel, a cupboard of solvents with the genteel menace of a farm shed. Locke palmed the Faraday sleeve, dropped the micro-SD into a reader, and jacked it into the till's cable run with a delicacy that would have made a cat purr. He tapped 3 keys that weren't labelled. The shop's lights did a dutiful dim. The receipt printer woke, yawned, and typed a smile. Closed for stocktake, please return at 9. Room authenticated, Locke murmured. He thumbed the stamped rubber crown we'd stolen at Wapping onto the counter's underside. A little sawtooth negative no audit would ever look for. Counters love ritual. Prep smelled of solvent and learnt behaviour. A steel drawer unit wore Dymo labels, Crown, F07, F1214. Locke slid F14 out with 2 fingers as if greeting an old sin. Not copper, photopolymer, on a rigid backer, a microscopic jungle of dots that only machines call flowers. The plate that prints the vine into the white, he said. Postmaster's alphabet. Don't wreck it, I said. Wrecking is loud. He set F14 in a small press, inked it with a whisper of black and kissed a strip of stamp margin. Under the loop, the vine bloomed its second language. The demodulator purred at the edge, polite as a maitre d'. Pad F14, OK. Root, Nixie B Dorex Orth, Crown. Default Crown, said. Let's make it choosy. He peeled a sliver of Captain Tape Thinner's regret, bridged 2 dots that ought never meet, and painted a third with conductive ink that dried with a smell like pennies. Another kiss, another margin. The demodulator read again. Pat. Yard. Cell 3, Crown L, I asked. Lestrade, he said, pleased and a little cruel. Our stamp pretends to recognise his shoulder as a room. Any F14 pad printed after this takes one look at his hyphen and walks itself to a cell. Postmaster can still rote his saints with other plates. His sinners will come to us. Ethics made their familiar necessary ache. We're not tearing the exchange, I said to myself as much as to him. We're pruning. Gently, he said. He made a duplicate F14 ours, with the altered dots sealed under a gloss so honest it felt like flattery. He set the original in a silicone mould, poured resin, and gave himself a twin he could leave behind that would pass any tired quartermaster's glance. 10 minutes can be elastic when you've spent a life stealing seconds. The receipt printer in the shop coughed. A strip curled out under the glass. Buy one, get one free? How enterprising. Postmaster had found the room. Lestrade's shadow deepened in the doorway without quite entering it. 2 minutes, he said softly. I'm running out of legitimate reasons to loiter near philately. Locke slid the altered F14 into the drawer. The original bagged, labelled immoral, went to my pocket as a weight I didn't enjoy. He wiped prints he hadn't left. The carousel turned itself a quarter. Somewhere in the wiring a relay laid down a warning for the memoir. Now we salt his till, he said. He lifted the shop labeller, printed Crown F14, count 0, and fed the strip back through the scanner so the inventory would believe it had given itself away. Counters dream in numbers, we scribbled in their margins. The receipt printer, offended, tried humour again. Please retain this receipt for your trial. Room's annoyed, I said. Rooms always are when their habits change, he replied. Footsteps. Not ours. The kind of gate that expects coats to remember names. A manager's key clicked a cylinder that had learned people. The shop door opened on a woman in a navy cardigan and a lanyard of confidence, flanked by a security guard who'd finished his crossword. Excuse me, she began, finding the closed for stocktake sign with her eyes and us with the rest. We don't. "Police," Lestrade said from behind her, voice low and public, badge already out, tone that convinces rooms to stay polite. "Night audit. Paperwork already hates us. Promise we leave no smudges." Her gaze flickered to my gloves, to Locke's careful hands, to the drawer we were emphatically not standing near. People in museums are trained to recognize malice. She recognized ritual. "You should have called," she said, and then heard her own sentence and decided to be sensible. "Do you need me to?" "No," Lestrade said gently. "Stay in the light. Pretend you saw nothing but a sign with a typo." She looked at the receipt roll as if it had winked. "There is a typo," she murmured, and backed out like someone who chooses the right lie. We put the drawer to rights. The demodulator sniffed our test strip a final time. Root yard, cell 3 glowed like a promise. Locke set a single doctored stamp aside, margin freckled with our F40 SAR, and drew a light diagonal in the corner, his echo mark. "Souvenir," he said. "If Postmaster prints on our vine, he brings us his hands." I washed at the staff sink because superstition has always saved more lives than science admits. The water ran cold and honest, the coin taste left. I watched it swirl away and thought of Keen's wrists, of Pell's breath returning on command, of routes that kept people alive by being unkind. Back in the shop, the receipt printer gave us a parting shot. "You forge heroes. I count." Locke pressed the crown under the counter again, harder this time, as if blessing. "Count this," he said, and killed our injected stock take with 3 keys that never existed. Lights normalized. The glass remembered being glass. "Walk," Lestrade said. "If anyone asks, we came for stamps and left with nothing but disappointment." Outside, the rain had decided to make a day of it. Pilgrim Street tasted of stone and queues that had nowhere to be. Lestrade's brick of a phone buzzed a single, stubborn vibration. "Bay 6 courier in custody," he read. Breathing, annoyed, unhelpful. Another buzz. "Mount Pleasant reports an unauthorized sort event at 036. Door 9 woke and then changed its mind." "Postmaster tested the vine," Locke said. He looked upward as if listening to the building's old gossip. "He'll sniff again, and then he'll send himself a letter to somewhere only he believes in." "Where?" I asked. "Where counters go when they decide to walk?" He smiled the quick, thin smile that meant he'd already built a map. "He'll try a route that never had a log, one of the Crown's private chutes from before audit was invented. We've just turned F14 into a mirror. When he steps through, it shows us his face." "And if he doesn't step?" Lestrade asked. "Then someone else will," Locke said. He tapped the pocket where the original plate lay. "And this time the stamp will have a memory. We took the long way to the car, because long ways keep you alive." Somewhere behind us, a printer in a room that called itself a shop typed a final line it would never file. "Stock take complete. Difference, 1 crown." Chapter 10. Counter walks. We went back to the old printworks because some crimes need the smell of ink to end. The tin of rubbing sat between us like a conscience. "One more letter," Locke said. "Postmaster reads pride. We write him a test he won't delegate." We set Fawley out again, our invented hero, our vine that sings, and laid the modified plate pattern F440 Slayer into the stamp margins. The tiniest constellation of dots sealing a promise we didn't intend to break. Beneath the vine, in the language only machines respect, Locke threaded a clean instruction. "Nixie, B2, D9, counter required. Return address, confirm in person." "Rude," I said. "Accurate," he replied. He drew a faint diagonal in the corner, his echo mark, and killed the light as if that made the lie kinder. Mount Pleasant's midnight had learned us by now. The crown key turned, the plinth sighed, our letter vanished down the throat. We waited in the park with our hands out of our pockets because rituals save time. A pouch rose as politely as a cat returning contraband. Inside, an inked rubbing that had forgotten how to be subtle. "You insist. Very well." "Pilgrim, tube 3, plate. F14." Lestrade's breath went out like a decision. "Counters don't walk," he said, "but pride does." "Then we set the table," I said. "Yard first," Locke answered, already calling a cab with the look he gets when he's not using a phone and somehow still is. If our vine sings true, yard, cell 3 is the chorus. King Edward Building had not forgiven the rain. Pilgrim Street yawned under the crown. Lestrade set his people quiet and human along the edges of the night. No blue lights, just a city watching itself. Tube 3's gate hummed exactly like a bad idea. The wayplate tasted of pennies. The coil behind the lip waited for someone to be greedy. We laid 2 of our doctored stamp margins across it, capped on, sealed, conductive painted, so the kiss would go to ground. 308. Down in the throat the air grew deliberate. The mouth coughed a pouch up, paused, then changed its mind and drew it back as if shy. A second cough, a second pouch. The system tested itself, found itself wanting, and decided to try faith. "Route primed," Locke murmured. We didn't touch the bag. We watched the counter walk. Up in the shop, the receipt printer woke as if embarrassed and typed 3 words, "Gift shop open." Lestrade nodded once. 2 steps, he said, and became a corridor. The philatelic counter was lit like a stage set that understood budgets. Behind glass, commemoratives pretended history was a stamp you could lick. On the counter, the little crown-lipped plate library drawer sat half open, guilty. He arrived the way clerks do, a coat you wouldn't notice, gloves a fraction too clean. He didn't look at us. He looked at the drawer. He took out F14 with a tenderness that could have passed for piety, inked it on the carousel's kiss, and pressed it to a strip of white margin he'd cut from a sheet of definitives. The dots took. The vine sang. Our sliver of conductive paint turned the hymn into a turnstile. He stamped the back of his glove, the negative sawtooth crown, and touched the pad. Somewhere between the counter and the floor, the building decided to be ours. The door behind the shop, unmarked, tidy, unstitched from the wall, and became a service corridor that hadn't existed for anyone else in 30 years. Postmaster stepped through without looking. Pride kept his head up. The corridor lights blinked to amber, then green, the way machinery blesses movement. "Walk," Lestrade said softly, and we became shadow. The corridor turned into a stair no fire officer would love. At the bottom, a cellar no map admitted to held a crown-stamped chute with an obedient mouth. Postmaster keyed the latch with the rubber crown on his glove. The mouth yawned. "Yard, cell 3, Locke whispered, almost affectionate. "Old GPO gentleman's door." Postmaster stepped through as if following a procedure he'd written. The lights decided the room was already occupied and shut the door very politely behind him. Lestrade didn't hurry. He arrived at the other door, the one that belonged to the present, and opened it with a key that said Metropolitan Police and a hand that had steadied furnace rooms and nursery steps with the same patience. Cell 3 smelt of disinfectant and old decisions. Postmaster stood in the centre of it, exactly as tall as procedure, exactly as ordinary as a man who thinks rooms are on his side. He looked at us, at the walls, at the rubber crown on his glove. He lifted his hand and pressed the sawtooth onto his palm, once as if checking the shape of his own faith. Nothing moved. "Counters don't walk," Lestrade said from the threshold. "Counters are visited." Postmaster's shoulders dropped a fraction. Resignation looks a lot like relief. "Inspector," he said, "you'll find my ledgers unpersuasive. They live in rooms you cannot search." Locke held up the Faraday sleeve with Rotes and Orth humming inside it like patient animals. "We brought a little room with us," he said. "And Hart?" Postmaster asked, almost gentle. "Left it closed," I said. "But we pulled the coil's teeth. Lampposts will only be lampposts this morning." He looked past us at the corridor that had brought him, then at the walls that had decided to keep him. "You forged a hero," he said. "You wrote nonsense into the vine. The city will forgive neither." "The city forgives what it can repeat," I said. "It will forget us as soon as it can. That's how it stays alive." He considered that and then smiled once in a way that did not accuse. "Counters are replaced," he said, almost to himself. "Make the replacement boring," Lestrade advised. "I have paperwork that likes boring." He closed the door. The lock made the sound good iron makes when it's pleased. Coda is a dangerous word. Cities don't end, they pause and pretend. By morning, Lestrade's forms had learned to say conspiracy to pervert, computer misuse, manslaughter by gross negligence, and, because someone behind a desk hates poetry, unauthorized possession of postal equipment. Pell sat in a room that smelt of tea and smarter choices and decided to name 3 names and withhold 2. The coil network had a bad day. Hospital telemetry went read-only for an hour, then woke sane. The plate library counted itself, found F14 present, and filed no complaint because Locke had left it a twin and a tidy lie. We took the long way to Postman's Park. Rain played its arithmetic on the shelter roof. The tiles were still themselves. Alice Ayres, Mary Rogers, men who drowned in canals trying to save boys who could not swim. There was no Thomas Forley, not on the wall. I had folded our rubbing back into the tin. Lies belong in drawers, not on brick. Lestrade arrived with a paper cup of tea and the look of a man who had survived a meeting by biting his tongue. He'll plead, he said, not to the killing, he'll call those malfunctions. To the rest, enough to keep him in a room without doors for a while. And the exchange? I asked. Pruned, he said, not burned. The charity corridors, witnesses, refugees, are being rebuilt by people who know how to hold their breath. Your stamp trick sent me 3 ghosts who thought they were beyond help. He took a careful sip. I told them a doctor had forged a hero for them. I forged a door, I said. Same difference, he replied. Locke stood a step back, watching the wall as if waiting for it to speak. He'll have left a letter somewhere, he said. Counters always do, not a confession. A route someone else will try to use badly. Then we'll buy more stamps, Lestrade said drearily. We were quiet a while. A gull had wandered too far from the river and was explaining this to a bin. Office workers edited their lunches with phones meant for better things. You kept heart closed, Lestrade said to me, not a question. It's a menu that kills people when men get frightened, I said. We shut the drawer and put a chair in front of it. Good, he said, and meant it. Locke took the tin from me and slid it under the bench, where it would not be found by anyone who did not already know what it was. For next time, he said, not quite smiling. The game never truly ends, I quoted, hearing the echo of another message in a different room. Until it does, Lestrade said, which is never on a Thursday. He left us to the tiles and the hush. Rain gentled. The city counted itself into another hour. I thought of Edmund Kean and the courier who had asked us to write a good tile and the invisible alphabet the living used to keep each other breathing. Of rotes hidden in vines and margins and men. Locke nudged my shoulder with his. Souvenir, he said, and placed a single harmless stamp in my palm, white margin blank, vine silent, the king smiling like a man who had never seen a sorting machine. Buy one, get one free, I said. Enterprising, he answered. We walked, not quickly. Behind us the memorial wall kept doing what it has always done, telling the truth the only way it knows, plainly in capitals, to anyone who will stop long enough to read.
This was Dr. Watson and the Dead Letter Exchange, written by Beryl Coops. I hope you enjoyed my short story. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. I have written over 500 short stories over the years under many pen names. I will be updating these and recording them under the Beryl Coops name. I will be listing them on YouTube as fast as we can get them recorded. They will include historical drama, humor, adventure, romance, period drama, mystery, thriller, war stories, spy stories, revenge, horror, psychological horror, dystopian, disaster, children's stories, love stories, and more. Too many to name. Something for everyone. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up. It helps others find my channel. Until next time, thank you for listening to the end.